Hello, my name is Shayne Larango, and this is Divine Meeting. Today, I am with my cousin, and I am with my lifelong friend, Kiley Jon Clark, and we are discussing our journey and experience to understand our relationship with the divine. Kiley, welcome.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on.
Super
Tell
excited.
us a little bit about yourself, Kiley.
Well, um, I am currently a supervisor for peer support specialists. Peer support specialists are people that have lived experience with a mental health diagnosis, which I do. I have a diagnosis, whatever that means, of anxiety and depression, and I'm also in recovery from alcoholism. And so I took a training to work with other people in the mental health field that were trying to navigate services. And so as a peer support specialist, I'm kind of like a professional friend that helps people navigate often confusing services in the mental health field. And so I'm in charge of a program called Connection Center. And so there's 5 of us in the Connection Center that are all peer support specialists, and what we do is we provide resources for people. We do support groups. We do trainings. We do workshops. We do cafes. Any way we can assist people, we do. And I'm also a lead meditation teacher at a Buddhist community center.
Buddhist, I love it.
A Buddhist community center called Woke House. And of course, we're meeting in person for over a year. And now it's all on Zoom because of COVID. But that's basically my job titles. Who I am, I'm still trying to find that out, but those are my job titles.
And can you say the organization that you work for or are employed by?
Yeah, so the official name of our program is Connection Center. Okay. And the longer title is Connection Center at the San Antonio Clubhouse. And so a clubhouse is a club for people that have a mental health diagnosis. And the main thing it does is help people beat isolation, which is strange in a time of COVID. But it's generally a place where you can come during the day, you can come and go. It's just like joining a gym or a club or something. And you got to have one of the top 6 diagnoses: bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, depression, PTSD, or anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
And if you have one of those, you're in the club. But what we did was, Clubhouse is downstairs. We opened up a program upstairs called Connection Center so that we could employ peer support specialists to give more personal attention to people when they're struggling, and also to do trainings and support groups and things like that.
Well, one of the things that I love most about that concept and about the execution of that is that it gives an amount of empowerment to the individual with that diagnosis to, in whatever way they can, to help themselves. And also, like you said, about find community. And because I think isolation is one of the most detrimental things that can happen to us as human beings. And I can go into longer about that and the ways that that happens. But what we're here today a little bit is to talk about your journey, and even mine. Like, we were in the same family, but I think by the time you were born and was going to school, like, your mother was kind of leading which church that y'all went to. And so y'all went to Lutheran churches. Well, I grew up with my mom directing us in a Baptist church, but that Protestant Christian background we both share like that. So how did you get from there to being Buddhist?
Yeah, I don't know actually why we even went to the Lutheran church, other than it was a block away from our house. I don't know that my mother was actually raised Lutheran.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah, and religion is funny, right? Because it was more about being in a small town and everybody going to church. It wasn't so much about the thing, the worship of God. It was that it was Sunday and you had to be somewhere. And I think my mom just picked the closest church. and she didn't always go, but she always sent me and my brother. And that's another funny thing about religion, right? Is that I remember telling my mom I don't want to go, and she said, "But you got to get confirmed. After you get confirmed, you don't have to go again." And I remembered that a couple of years earlier, my brother went through catechism or confirmation classes, and then when he turned 13, he was confirmed, and he never went back to church. And so I was like, okay, so I was there every Sunday, and I was actually an acolyte. I would help, and this is also, so symbolic of the rest of my life. I was put in a position. I don't remember any other kid doing it. I only remember me.
Yeah.
And the time I was there, I was the one that always lit the candles to start the service, and I put out the candles at the end of the service, much like what I do at Woke House. And so I would go back there with the priest or the preacher, and I would put on the same type of garments and robes. And I would go out there, the music started playing, and I would light all the candles. And so it was really a beautiful experience that I appreciate now. And I think I've drawn from that ritual experience, and even the changing of the robes. And I was becoming something else. It felt, even as a kid, kind of sacred or holy. Even though I was really nervous because, God forbid, I couldn't light one of the candles. I would want to crawl under a pew and never come out.
That's where your anxiety kicked in, right?
Exactly. I would be praying, "Oh God, please let the candles light. Please God, let me light the candles." And they were so high, and it was weird. It was hard for a little kid to light those candles, but so I remember getting confirmed, even though I got kicked out of confirmation class 1 or 2 times and had to get a note from my mom to get back in. I eventually did get confirmed, and then I quit going back. But here's the funny thing about this, Shayne, is even though I quit going to church when they were there, I started going back when nobody was there.
Yeah.
And so in Rungi, they didn't lock the churches. You could go in and out day or night. The doors were always unlocked, especially at the Catholic church. You would go in there and people would be praying all night and day. I would go to the Lutheran church. As a little kid, walk down on the weekend, and I would just go hang out in the church by myself, just because it was so peaceful.
It was a sanctuary.
It was a sanctuary.
Yeah.
And it was calm,
I remember having those experiences in empty churches as well.
And the stained glass and the light coming through the windows, and
my first religious experience had a stained glass window with light coming through it. Yeah, absolutely. So was there anything?
Can I say something really quickly about that?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
So I just want to say, one time I went into the church and I felt this overwhelming feeling of like God or longing for God, really. And I looked up and there was this framed picture of Jesus up above the door that led into like the fellowship hall. And I got a bunch of chairs and I stacked them one on top of each other, and I climbed up to the top and I kissed Jesus. And this was a rickety, rockety, 3 or 4 chairs on top of each other. And but I remember just wanting to be so close to God and wanting something to happen with God, and that I climbed up there and risked, getting injured to kiss Jesus. And then fast forward years and years later, when I was in my 20s, I moved to West Texas and I rented a house there. And I was wondering if I had made the right decision. And when I went into that house, when the guy was showing me around to see if I wanted to rent it or not, I opened the door and the first thing I saw was that picture.
Wow.
Of Jesus. The same exact picture was hanging in that house. So yeah, so spirituality has always been like on the, just somewhere in the background that's been a part of my psyche. And
yeah, I think that's something that we share. A love of the love of Westerns, Louis L'Amour books, and spiritual experiences. So
we need to too.
I know, right? So Kelly, was there anything in between when you got confirmation in the Lutheran church and then this experience with Buddhism, or
yeah, a lot
anything
of seeking.
formal?
Yeah, a lot of seeking.
Seeking. Okay.
Yeah, so basically my bottom was when my wife left me and took the kids because of my drinking, right? And there was more details to that, but what eventually happened was me attending a 12-step program. And when I found all this time on my hands that I used to spend drinking, um, oh man, all this stuff was coming up, like all the negative things that I'd done to people and said, and just what a big piece of crap I was, and how all my actions had affected people, and it was a lot of guilt and shame and remorse and resentments. And so I started working through that, of course, with my sponsor in the 12-step group, but he was giving me books to read, and then I started reading on my own. And then it was every self-help book you can imagine, plus anything about religion or spirituality or whatever. And then I eventually ran across this book, which is kind of a cool story too, but I won't share it here. Is that I found this book on Zen Buddhism, and I read the book in one sitting. I stayed up all night long reading that book from cover to cover. And in the back of it, there was how you can get these printed out labels for
Mm-hmm.
your envelopes that
Mm-hmm.
have your name and address on it. On the very back of that cover, whoever had owned that book before had put their label on there, their address. So after I read the book, I wrote them a letter. And that morning I closed the book and I got up and I wrote a letter and I walked down to the post office and I mailed it. And then I went back home and I went to sleep. And then a couple of days later, I checked my mail and the letter had returned to me. And I looked at it and I had put my address in the middle and his address as the return. So I mailed it to myself. And so that was also a quick learning experience, is about seeking outside myself for the answers. So I mailed a letter to myself. And so anyway, that started a whole thing about looking for places to meditate. And I found the Shambhala Center in San Antonio. And I started, showing up there every time the doors were unlocked to start studying, and talk about my spirituality. When I went in there and I saw the Buddhas and the candles and the tonkas, which are paintings, I thought, man, these people are worshiping the devil up in here. I don't want to be a part of this pagan religion. Where that came from.
Yeah, their imagery is much different than a Protestant Christian imagery,
Right.
isn't it?
I thought I was going to go to hell if I was going in there. And even though I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't been to church in God knows how long, those early things that you hear stick with you. And so it just led to actually starting to practice meditation and getting more into Buddhism and reading about Buddhism and all that stuff in the early years.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that meditation led you to was that sense of solace that you found within yourself, and you wanted to like exemplify that for others. Because one of the first things, like I remember you doing outreach, because you've always had a heart for people who were suffering. I see that in growing up with you. You always had a heart for people who were homeless, um, and without shelter. And so you started doing your meditation practice under the bridges in San Antonio, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought that was awesome. That was,
Yeah, that was, once again, just trying to merge everything together in my life. I once again, I started reestablishing the relationship with my children, so I started getting them on every other weekend. But on the weekends I didn't have them. I didn't really have much to do, so I started volunteering at a homeless facility in San Antonio, because it was like I could be over there on Saturday and Sunday volunteering, doing something worthwhile, or I could be home thinking about drinking. So it was kind of a no-brainer to do something to get outside of myself and my own head. And at that time, of course, I was also practicing meditation. So when I wasn't at the shelter volunteering, I would just go out in front on the sidewalk downtown San Antonio, and I would just start doing my own meditation. And then sometimes I would open my eyes and there'd be 3 or 4 people sitting in front of me. either just staring at me or doing their own meditation. And so then that led to, you know, a whole different kind of ministry of going different places and not really trying to influence anybody or do anything great, but just trying to bring what I was gaining into the world and
Mm.
birthing it. And so I got to know a lot of people, and sometimes they'd ask me, "Hey, do you want to meet up next Saturday under such and such bridge and do this again?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, let's do that." And then, of course, I started doing more scheduled meditation groups inside the shelter itself.
Yeah,
And so I was volunteering as a meditation teacher in the shelter, and I was doing it out on the streets.
as
So
well. And that's kind of part of the evolution that you're now doing Woke House. You're still offering that kind of scheduled meditation within the context or in that environment. But now we're doing it online, which is really exciting for me because I get to come.
yeah.
I get to join you for that. So, another thing, Kiley, that you have always had a relationship with church, because I also remember a time that you were involved in a Christian church,
Oh yeah.
and I don't remember exactly which one it was, so you'll have to clarify. And you had a weekly radio hour on the local radio in
I,
Floresville, Texas.
yeah, so I did return to church. It was probably my late 20s or early 30s, and I had this born again experience. And I was actually, you know, if I'm going to do something, I do it all the way, right?
You
So
do it all, and you garner a lot of attention when you do.
so I figured if I was going to be born again, if I was going to go through all the trouble of being born again, I might as well be the preacher, right? And so I started doing little things like, and this was way before the homeless meditation and stuff. This was I
Yeah.
was In fact, I had stopped drinking for that 6 years and sobered up, and I was in church all the time. And then I relapsed and I left church and I went back to drinking for many, many, many more years before I actually sobered up and then got into Buddhism and everything. But yeah, there was a period there in my early 30s where for about 6 years I was standing behind pulpits. I even had a tent ministry. I can say that I've been a rodeo clown, a tent evangelist, God, you name it, I don't know.
Yeah.
Butcher, baker, candlestick maker, but yeah, I had a little radio show on the local Floresville radio station. It was pretty fun.
And do you remember when you lost that radio show?
When I lost it,
Uh-huh.
I think I just stopped doing it because I found out that the bandwidth wasn't very far, that you had to actually live within just a couple of miles of the radio station to hear it.
Well,
But
and you may not have lost it over this, but I'm trying to remember the story. But you got in a whole lot of trouble the time that you had me on as a guest.
oh, okay.
Do you remember that?
Remind me of that.
Well, I started talking. I mean, like we had a conversation, and I tend to get out there with my thoughts, and I didn't understand what I was doing, but I was challenging the notion of a oppressive patriarchal religion. And so, yeah, so you had a woman on your radio show who
Oh,
was speaking about the Bible, and
yeah.
that was not acceptable. That was not socially acceptable.
Yeah, I
So,
remember it now. Yeah.
yeah,
You shocked a lot of people.
I do. Which is something interesting that you told me before we started recording, is that I tend to say things that kind of um blow people's minds, is what you said. And and it's so funny because I don't realize what I'm saying. Like I feel like it's something that I feel, but a
Mm,
lot of times it's in direct opposition to like the power over structure that religion puts on people, and then the whole patriarchal nature of it, of my resistance as a woman. and
yeah.
and I know that I am divine, and I am not, I am I am either closer to the concept of creator as a woman than a
Hmm.
man is, but at very least I am equal. So, and that does kind of surprise people. And I say some other things too. I don't know what all I do to shock people, but that's one of which I am very familiar with, that my view of myself in the context of the story of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they say
So,
if you want to know how people are trying to control you, challenge it.
mhm.
And people get very upset when you challenge their religious beliefs, and
Mhm.
it often has led to killing other people because of religious beliefs.
And the
And
funny thing is that
you have to cry
that
and
a
shame.
challenge can be construed within a question. You're just
Right.
asking, "Can you clarify this for me?" And that in and of itself, because it's not based in reality, it's based in a control,
Hmm.
power over paradigm, it is a challenge. A question is a challenge. So,
I think
so
that's what really drew me to Buddhism, is that Buddha said, "Don't take my word for it. Do not believe me just because I said it or anybody else said it. Test it for yourself. If
mhm,
it doesn't work in your life, if it doesn't make sense to you, throw it away." And that was 2,500 years ago.
yeah.
And so there's never been a war started by Buddhism. There hasn't been, and that's what I like about, Woke House, is that we're open to multiple perspectives and point of views, and I may personally feel challenged sometimes because my own perception, but Buddhism, or the message that's being brought across, if there is one, can never be challenged,
Mhm,
because Buddha could never be challenged.
yeah.
It is what it is. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Well, and my introduction to Buddhism was a book that you sent me, and you asked me just to read it. And so I did, and it just was like, wow, the message of love reminded me so much of the themes of the New Testament and the message of Christ. And one of the things that I've found in talking to people as a misconception is they think that Buddha is a god, and we're like, no, like, no, no. Like, he's just a prophet, he's just a messenger similar to Christ. And so, yeah, so that whole misconception of what Buddhism is, I see a lot just in the people that I run across. But also you kind
I
of,
want to say real quick
uh-huh,
about real quick, because
yeah.
I actually love what Buddha said about that. They said he looked so radiant and happy that people would ask him, "Are you a god?" And he would say no. And they say, "Are you an angel?" And he would say no. "Are you a prophet?" And he would say no. And they would
Mm,
say, "Well, what are you?" And he would say, "I'm awake.
mm,
I'm simply awake." And so whatever that means, that I guess that would say that most of us are still asleep,
mm,
and that there is awakening that is available to all of us at any time we want to tap into it.
yeah. And I love to, in the story of your evolution, that kind of crosses some experiences that I had that I didn't even share with you until I was a grown adult because they were so surreal.
Hmm.
Is when you came back in, through a Christian standpoint, by with A Course of Miracles,
Hmm.
and you did. You explain what A Course of Miracles is.
Oh man.
But it's a course that you can take, right? You can do the study and graduate from it. It's a but
Well,
also
oh
where it
no,
comes.
so A Course of Miracles, and so yeah, I know what you mean by that, but I'll give you that distinction. So A Course of Miracles, I want to say like in the late 60s, was kind of a channeled, they're saying channeled nowadays. That wasn't, what they were talking about back then, but a professor, I'm not sure she was a professor, but I think she worked at Columbia University. She had a doctorate. She was a doctor, and they worked in the psychology department. Her name is Helen Schuckman. And so anyway, Helen Schuckman started hearing Jesus talk to her. And so she started writing it down. She said she was the scribe And so she wrote down this manifesto, these beautiful teachings. And the first line was, "This is a Course in Miracles."
Mm.
And so that's where the name came from. So, um, yeah, so there's a lot to be said there. But then when I got into it, I actually found a seminary, an online seminary called Pathways of Light. And I
Oh,
took the
okay.
Pathways of Light seminary and got ordained as a minister counselor. And so I would have my weekly lessons, and then every Friday I would talk to my mentor over the phone, and we'd go over my homework and all that stuff. And I graduated and was ordained. And to
Okay.
me, it was, I could see Buddhism in it all the way. I
Mm-hmm.
could see, you know, it kind of was meaningful to me because it was kind of like putting Buddhism in the symbols that I was familiar with as a Christian.
Right. And that was something that we even talked about in Woke House today, was that people have these experiences and then use the language of their culture, of their society, of their region of earth to explain them. And if you take the time to look at other people's experiences and past the words that they use and the metaphors that they're using, and the analogies they're using to explain them, you tend to find the divine behind that. And it's just,
Yeah. And Buddhism is still kind of foreign to me as a kid growing up in a small South Texas town. I have to often try to convert the symbolism into something that I understand. So, A Course in Miracles was kind of like a duck to water, that I already knew what, the symbol of Jesus and the crucifixion and the atonement and the resurrection and communion and all those things, but they were just using them slightly differently in a more Buddhist type of philosophy.
mhm.
And so I felt it was very palpable to me.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that I want to point out that they're talking about this woman, and using the word to best describe it again. They're trying to put a word to an experience this woman
Hmm.
had, and they're using the word channeling. So she's saying that she wasn't the source, that
Hmm.
she was just the scribe, that this knowledge was coming through her, or these words or things were coming through her, and she was translating an energetic thing to a language that other people, that she could then share with other people. And
Hmm.
so hearing those voices sometimes in different, like, that's a more, I mean, she had a very positive outcome. She was, prestigious in her academic work or who she was. But when that kind of information comes to someone in a different situation, we talked about this one time, is like, what makes the difference in a schizophrenic and a mystic? And you told me at one point that the mystic floats in the waters that a schizophrenic drowns in, or something to that effect. Do you remember that? Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah. So, and I will correct you just a little bit that,
Yeah, go ahead.
and I only do this because I love you, and you're my cousin, right? And so I know that you won't take this as an attack, but uh, to say schizophrenic is old language in mental health, and
Hmm.
it's always evolving. So it's gone from a person is a schizophrenic to a person that is struggling with schizophrenia to
Hmm.
now they're called voice hearers,
I
or
love that.
people that have unusual experiences. And so it's the people themselves that have changed their labels and asked their doctors, clinicians, psychiatrists to stop calling them schizophrenics.
I appreciate that correction, because that is very important, that somebody with the experience gets to label it themselves.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now people are saying I'm a voice hearer. And that ties in exactly what you're saying about somebody who channels or is attuned to other ways of knowing things.
Mhm. Yeah, because this is one of the things that I don't tell many people, but I'm starting to get out there. I'm like, I've been coming out of the spiritual closet for like
Mm,
10 years really slowly. But
mm,
I have, and this is my distinction. This is the best way that I can understand it. So I don't know if my words are even right or they would be the ones that I may choose later. But I communicate through energy first. I have all kinds of feelings. And then those feelings will sometimes translate themselves into images that I see. And then at a far distant third, I find words. And so, yeah, it has been a lifelong struggle for me to communicate my experience. And so I've worked really, really hard at it. But yeah, I realize now, like, I had childhood experiences, and I remember the reactions to trying to communicate those were very negative. So I learned to keep my mouth shut about
mm.
what was going on and not just sit there with it. And for whatever reason, I wasn't afraid of it, which I think probably saved my life, and saved me going down a really, really rocky road, but that I
Mm.
was never afraid of these things that I felt and then could sometimes see that other people could not feel and see.
Yeah.
So,
And I want to say I admire you for coming out and talking about these things, right? Um, you'll never know how much that might help somebody else hearing that, right?
yeah,
It can be very scary thinking that you're the only one, and that if you tell somebody, they're going to lock you up in a hospital and throw away the key, right? So
yeah,
anybody that has unusual experiences, or they're a voice hearer, or they see things, I think it's important that we verbalize that and let the world know that it's okay, and
yeah.
that
Well,
it's actually just another way of experiencing the world, and it actually could be a gift, right?
oh,
One,
now I definitely see that it
yeah.
is. And that's the thing, though, that you still, in this day and age, unfortunately, you still have to be very careful to do that in a safe place,
Hmm.
because there are too many people with very narrow focus, very limited, ideas, closed minds that cannot comprehend that you can be a functional person and just have a different bandwidth for energy. I mean, and so,
Well, what's unfortunate is in our culture we don't get training, and we don't have mentorship. So a lot of times, what turns out, what
mhm,
is so going back to your original thing, so somebody that is a voice hearer, um, well, I'll put it this way. So they say that somebody who is experiencing mental illness is drowning in the water that a mystic learns to swim in. So in other words,
mm,
if you don't know what you're doing, or you can't understand what you're experiencing, and you don't know how to use it as a gift or channel it in the right way, and everybody around you saying that it's a negative thing that shouldn't be happening, and they're putting pills down your throat, and they're putting you in the
mm,
hospital, and every connotation around this thing is negative, of course you're going to drown. But
yeah,
to a mystic or a shaman or a medicine man or woman, or a healer who has the proper mentorship and training, and it's seen in a positive light as a gift to the community, of course it's seen as a blessing, and you learn how to use it in a bit beneficial way. And so I'm hoping in the future we can get back to those things, and I think we will.
mhm,
I think
yeah,
that form of spirituality is going to save us, because it's often very nature based and holistic, and I
mhm.
think we're getting there.
And then I think it's beautiful too, because I had such a strong connection with the story of Christ and what he stood for, and the idea of a love, like eternal, everlasting, abundant, what is it, unconditional love
Mm-hmm.
of the Christ story, that it aligns itself to with accepting people as they are, with accepting other people's experiences, with accepting people who have different words to express their experience with the divine. And just because you grew up and in your language, the word God was God, but in another person's language, the word God is Allah, doesn't mean that those are two different entities or beings. They're two words for the same thing. And so, like, that expansion of consciousness, or actually learning a different language, is as simple as that. You can open up yourself to other people's experiences and their expression of those without denying or rejecting the way you understand it and the way you experience it and the way you speak about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of an old hat, but Jesus hung out with prostitutes and thieves and tax collectors, and I didn't read in the Bible where he was condemning them or preaching to them or anything. He was just modeling unconditional love.
Well, and then the fact, like, there's that whole concept of the day of Pentecost, where you realize that there's people speaking all kinds of different languages also too. So I mean, they're everybody. It's from different cultures, from different worlds, from different neighborhoods, from different countries, that understand this concept too.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this, the idea that came kind of through the Course of Miracles study that you have about the circle of love.
Well, yeah, so it's because I do have this background in a Course in Miracles, and I read a lot in that subject matter, but I've never really did anything with it, right? My primary thing to the world has been Buddhism, Buddhist teachings and meditation and stuff. So I'm kind of thinking maybe I should use some of this knowledge that I've gained or some insights I've gained in A Course in Miracles in some way. And then the other morning before work, I looked at my phone and I had sent myself a message 6 years ago. You know how on Facebook it says 6 years ago you posted this thing, and it said, never stop attempting to expand your circle of love. And then it just kind of hit me. Circle of love, expanding my circle of love. And the way I am and the way I think, I immediately Googled circleoflove.com, circleoflove.org, and nobody has that domain name, right? So I'm like, this must be from God. And so I can't hear you.
Oh, I turned off my speaker. I was trying to take a drink of water without doing that. Okay.
Okay.
So,
What did you say?
yeah. Oh, I said, yeah, if nobody's ever had that thought before to create a domain from it, that is true original thought, and all true creation and original thought comes from the creator, right?
Yeah, and I didn't do a whole lot of research, but just, in a couple of seconds, it looked like nobody owns that domain name. So
I hope you already got it before I post this.
yeah, well, if it's meant to be, it'll be fine, I guess. But you talk about coming out of the closet about some stuff, is that, so here I am, somebody who represents, to the best of my ability, Buddhism, right? And you talk about being attached to dogma and being afraid to step out of your box, right? Because in a very real way, I owe my whole life to hold on a second, the dog is going.